I would like to return to our topic at hand, which was titled Authentic Christianity. And we began a journey multiple weeks ago. And that journey was on this idea of kind of the ache in the heart of God that happens due to disingenuousness. You know, you would think it's just something new, but it's not. It's been going on since Cain and Abel, Adam and Eve, and Cain and Abel. And it's without any wonder then that in the Old Testament, the Lord has many things to say about it. And so we move through this authentic Christianity discussion quickly into the Gospel of John. And we saw so many things, really the secret to authentic Christianity. And it pretty much begins and ends, if you will, with this concept that abiding in Christ is the key. And it doesn't mean that you're sort of waiting in the room for the Lord to come in like it's some sort of prearranged coffee hour. But it means that there is a habitation of God in you, and you have made God your home too. There is a mutual sort of combining together. And in fact, the Lord Jesus was so taken up with this concept, he prayed about it and said, I pray that they will be one as you and I are one. What a standard of comparison to ask, or for the Lord Jesus to ask. Father, as you and I are one on all that is in existence, which, you know, he's talking about the Trinity. He says, now I'd like you to do that and forge that into my people, into your people. And so that tells you just how much oneness and really authentic oneness means to God. So we went through that John 15 chapter. Now tonight is beginning a new segment that is very important and related to authenticity. I talked about the secret with abiding, but now I need to discuss with you the sort of the most important disposition to have, this responsiveness. And for lack of a better phrase or terminology, it's simply called the fear of the Lord. And when I go and have a chance to talk with folks, interview them, do a little non-scientific, non-sociologic survey, if I ask you, well, what's the fear of the Lord? Today, many of us would scratch our heads and say, well, it means some will say, well, it means reverence. It means reverence or awe, you know. Well, I'd like to make a case tonight that it means way more than that. And by the time we're done with it'll probably take us 3 or 4 sessions. We'll have a working definition together. And we're going to sort of treat this as exhaustively as we can, because without the fear of the Lord, there is no authenticity. And so we really have to zero in on this, if you will, drill down on it so that we come away with the right perspective. In fact, this evening, our outline will be perspective, distinction, depiction, description, definition. And we won't make it through all of those. We'll only make it through one at most. So tonight, I want you to see a sort of a general introduction as we simply gain some perspective. Fear of the Lord, Psalm 110 or 111, verse 10. Psalm 111, verse 10. These are only a sampling of the plethora of data that's in the Bible on the fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. A good understanding have all those who keep his commandments. That's a pretty famous verse. It's very akin to Proverbs 9:10, which says the following, Proverbs 9, verse 10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and by knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. So these two verses are very parallel in their thought, their ideology. And he says, you know, the right perspective of God, the fear of the Lord, actually is the threshold in which you gain a heart of wisdom. And not just that you gain an understanding of all of the happenings that happen in this world. It's specifically linked to keeping his commandments. So the fear of the Lord, based on Psalm 110, or 111 verse 10, is specifically associated, correlated, if you will, with this idea of keeping his commandments. I have such a disposition towards God, whatever that is, which we'll define, that it shows up, it's evidenced, it's portrayed, it's demonstrated in my obedience to his commands. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because in the past few years, I've had to do some study in various disciplines. And one of the disciplines I was studying was philosophy. They have these really incredible words that sound so impressive. But one of those words is epistemology, knowledge, and you're kind of the theory of knowledge. There's quite a few words like that in the study of philosophy. But one of the things I've noticed was that, when you talk about the source of knowledge and where it comes from, it all depends upon your, as you would guess, your worldview. If you don't have a view that God is real, that he is myth or a fable at worst, you pretty much dismiss any sort of thinking that God has sovereignty or rulership over creation or you. And so obviously your worldview affects your understanding of nature and life. But when you have the fear of the Lord, now you have a filter that produces a certain kind of prism called wisdom. And this wisdom means that I am now interpreting the data that any secularist can interpret, and I'm interpreting the data in light of this supernatural God that has created all things and governs all things and is all things. And by the way, all things is for him because that's the appropriate way that it works. God created, of course he should be worshiped. And so when you have that sort of mindset, it really shapes, it really molds, it really has a tailorship to your perspective. Now, I'm going to try to give you an example of that from my own life. When I started medical school, I was 18 years old. It's a 6-year program, and they took me right out of high school. That means, that's not to impress you, that means I'm dumber than a brick. And when my first class that I took was a sociology class, and it was quite an impressive class. The instructor also moonlighted as a postman. And he looked a little bit like Newt Gingrich. And he was articulate, and he was funny, and he had us all kind of relaxed. And I listened intently to his sociologic presentations. We talk about anthropology, which in his view was godless, or a god without any god, excuse me. And he would articulate about various cultures in the world. And he began to introduce the theory of cultural relativism. Now, you don't need to remember it. It's not going to be on any test, but basically the theory says that each culture is independent of one another, meaning they have no right, no culture has a right to tell another culture what is right or wrong, what is righteousness or non-righteousness. And so if you have headhunters who are in the land of Indonesia or New Guinea or in Ecuador, and they kill people and are cannibals, well, that's their culture. And their culture is really more dominant. It shouldn't be messed with. And no Christian even said that. No Christian has the right to go in there and tell him it's wrong. Because who says that Christianity is right? And then he went off on this mantra about the worthlessness of God. Now, when I tell you I was young and dumb, I was very close to agreeing with his naturalistic, illogical view. And I really had a hard time with that. And this verse, these two verses, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, really made sense to me in hindsight. That if I had the right perspective towards God, then I would have the right filter to understand the data. But that man had no fear of God, and so he was filtering the data through a prism that produced distortion of the truth. Now, I say this because there's a lot of our college students and a lot of our master's students that are beat up with this kind of thinking, and it becomes very convincing, as I was nearly convinced 30 years ago, and it becomes sort of it sort of begins to cast doubts and seeds of uncertainty in their faith. Now, it may not destroy them then, but you give it 10 years and now you got marital problems and fracture lines in the family, and they begin to remember that. And then you give it another 10 years and now there's changes in your body and changes in your marital relationship, and now you begin to remember it again. And so the seeds of doubt that Satan's planting in these teen years have a way of slowly germinating and producing some fruit in about 2 or 3 decades. And so I think it's important that we then go back to this basic tenet of all things called wisdom, where our writers of the Old Testament, our investigators of all things wisdom, i.e. Solomon, would say, it's the fear of the Lord. We in America, we have this saying, it's the economy, stupid, right? And that's how you get elected president, have a good economy. Well, sometimes I think we need to say it's the fear of the Lord, stupid. That's really what's going on. And having the correct perspective gives the gateway, the threshold, the absolute possibility that you can really interpret the data of the naturalistic world in the correct way so that you will have the correct conclusion. That is not bias, that's a fact. If I use the wrong formula in statistics on certain data, I get the wrong conclusions. Why do we honor that in a discipline of mathematics and we won't honor that in the discipline of philosophy? It makes no sense. It's a double standard. In fact, it's a triple standard. And so I think we can make a strong case for this. And just in our introductory comments, the fear of the Lord is where it all starts. That's the take-home message. Yes, it will produce something called understanding. That's where we can arrange all the facts before us, all the ecological facts, all the microscopic facts, all the cellular facts, all the astronomy facts, all the facts about the ecology, all the facts about human nature, all the facts about sin, all the facts about our problems, and we can actually have an understanding that is able to cohesively explain it all. That's the one thing that people want to do. They want to have one theory that explains all of life. We've got it. We've already got it. And so we want to, I think, boldly and yet with poise and grace articulate that. I tell you this because I've seen too many of our young people go AWOL, depart from the faith, and the fear of the Lord was lacking. I could see the fear of the Lord was lacking in their language. I could see it was missing in their perspectives, and I could see it was evaporating in their classes. Well, I don't think we need to lie down for that, do you? I think we need to proclaim the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, which means that that young person has a journey to go on. If it's just the beginning, we've got a long way to go, but it is the right way to go about it. So I argue that in this sense, if it was a college class, and yet to you, I present it as really a reminder that this is the fear of the Lord takes precedent in philosophical epistemology, if you will. Now that I've impressed you with all those big words, which I had to look up in the dictionary before tonight, let's move on to Ecclesiastes 12:13. Ecclesiastes 12:13. These are just introductions, and I want you to kind of get a flavor of how God considers the fear of the Lord. Now, if you're a reader of Ecclesiastes, you will find that it is a bit of a depressing book. And the reason why it's a depressing book is because the author, we believe Solomon, went on a personal study. He took a sabbatical, if you will, from all things reality, and he decided to investigate, almost like a prolonged opportunity for study abroad. He began to investigate all that might satisfy in life. You know the story. He went into all kinds of pleasure, and then he went into all the kinds of knowledge and all kinds of creativity. And each time he fell empty. There was nothing satisfactory. The reason why there's nothing satisfactory is because in a theistic or theocentric viewpoint, we actually find that God is the one that completes us. Now, God doesn't need us to complete him, but he allows him to complete us. In fact, we're the only, or he is the only individual, the only being that can fully bring man to an appropriate sort of satisfaction in man's existence. And so we find that in Ecclesiastes, he gets to the end, the preacher gets to the end of his discussion, and he says the final word. Now, I like the final word. A lot of times I just want to hear the bottom line. I don't want to hear your calculus. But he says here, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Do you hear it? It's just think of an exhausted, philosophical, some at times hedonistic gentleman. And he says, let me tell you, I've been everywhere. I've been up, I've been down, I've been left, I've been right. I've any kind of tantalizing thing, I've done it. Any kind of philosophical thing, I've done it. And the one thing, you know, if I'm in a college class and the professor says that, that's going to be on the test, all right? The one thing, fear God, that results in keeping his commandments. That's the end, the demonstration of fearing the Lord. For this is man's all. This is the thing that completes man. And so the fear of the Lord shows up again. That phrase has tremendous lock key mechanism to mankind. In fact, it is the only phrase that's used in this capacity in all of the Old Testament. The fear of the Lord does amazing things. It gives wisdom, it gives understanding, and for man, it's his all. That's why we have to pay attention to this. And I would submit my thesis is that it is the one thing that produces authentic Christianity. Now, I want to turn to a couple more scriptures that are a little bit more specific, and these are appropriate for our times. Isaiah 8, please. Isaiah 8, and we're going to look at verse 11. So Isaiah 8, and we'll be in verse 11. Now, let me prep this well. As you know, Isaiah was really addressing the kings of the south. By this time of writing, the kings of the north, the northern kingdom, had been taken away. And Hezekiah was a big part of the ministry of Isaiah. Now, Isaiah is written in such a fashion that the first 20 odd chapters are just loaded with judgment. And judgment against his people. And then it's judgment against the nations that he used to chasten his people. And you get through this sort of dense fog of judgment. But then the tone changes and you get into this bright sunshine of God's provision. And it talks about the Messiah and the servant. And we get Isaiah 53, and then it talks about the rain. So Isaiah, then, some people say, is kind of like a miniature Bible in a sense. And so we have that sort of feel to it. Now, I'm picking up the text in Isaiah 8, and Isaiah is sort of in the middle of communicating to the people of his day that God is going to judge you. And God turns in his conversation where Isaiah was God's spokesman. Now God turns to directly address Isaiah. So he's going to have a conversation with his servant. Let's eavesdrop into the conversation. Chapter 8 and verse 11. For the Lord spoke thus to me with a strong hand and instructed me that I should not walk in the way of this people. Okay. So in other words, God, what he says is God was really strict. He was very, very strong on this point. And he said, you should not walk according to the way of this people. Now, walk in this case is not saying that Isaiah is doing what they're doing, but he's going to say, Isaiah, I don't want you to think like they're thinking. And so don't do that, because this is how they're thinking. Do not say a conspiracy. So he says, do not say, Isaiah, there's a conspiracy, because that's what everyone else is saying. Now, the conspiracy was sort of between the kings of Syria and Assyria, as well as Syria, and then it kind of get into cahoots with other kingdoms. They're either going to attack Israel or they're going to defend Israel. And so there's this wave of who to trust politically, what's going to happen. It seems uncertain. And so people were saying, well, there's conspiracy afoot. We can't tell what it is. Boy, I tell you, that sounds very similar to something I've heard of. Oh, our current day. It's exactly what we hear. We've got conspiracy theorists. We make movies about that conspiracy theory. And we got intrigue and doubt within government authorities and city officials and state officials and provincial officials. And we have all this cloudiness. And God, I think, would tell us in the same sort of passionate way. Now, when you hear that there's all these conspiracies afoot, don't go with them. Don't fall into the conspiracy minefield. Look at what he says next. Calling all that this people call a conspiracy. Now, here's the one I want you to notice, this clause. Nor be afraid of their threats, nor be afraid. Notice the word fear. Nor be troubled. So he's using the poetic device, which is really synonymous parallelism, saying, don't fear, don't get yourself all worked up. And then he says this. The Lord of hosts, him you shall hallow. What does hallow mean? That means set apart. But look what he means specifically. Let him be your fear, and let him be your dread. Now, why do I do this so methodically as if we're grade schoolers? Because, saints, we're fearing the wrong person today. We're fearing the wrong machinery. We're fearing the wrong political thing. We're fearing the wrong rumor. You see, according to this passage, which we have put in its context and now extrapolated, moved out to apply to us, I would say to you that I think what's happening to us is that we are becoming disingenuous because we do not have the right fear. It's possible to fear the wrong thing. Isaiah, don't fear those conspiracies. Isaiah, don't get all worked up about all that stuff that may or may not happen. Don't worry about tax cuts or no tax cuts. What you need to fear, who you need to fear, my friend, is the Lord. That's who you need to fear. And in that passage, verse 13, the word Lord is Yahweh, the covenant-keeping God. That's what he means. You need to fear him. Several other titles are used, but are alluded to. But the covenant-keeping God who crafted his agreement with Israel, now that's the guy. That's the one that should hold this right response. You're given the right response to everything else except me. Don't do that, Isaiah. You keep your heart fixated on me. Now, saints, I think God is telling us that today. Don't get fixated on all the other things that's just dropping like flies around you. Don't do that. Don't do that at all. If you want to be a genuine Christian, you first have to settle the focus of your fear. And if the focus of your fear is about anything temporal, anything temporary, anything that will be like here today, gone tomorrow, like a grass of the field, rather than the word of God, then what you will find is that you will be labeled as disingenuous because nothing but the fear of the Lord creates consistency in a person's life. That's what the fear of the Lord does. Remember, it's the main thing. Out of all the things that Solomon learned, he's saying, get the fear of the Lord. That's what you need to have. The psalmist, the writers said in the Psalms and the Proverbs, listen, the fear of the Lord starts it all. And Isaiah is saying the fear of the Lord completes it all. So as we go forward in this sort of new segment of our study, I really want to, how do I say this nicely? I want this to be sort of drilled into our thinking, the fear of the Lord. It's required of God for the right perspective. It gives you the right understanding. And lastly, it can be easily squandered by fearing the wrong thing. Are you fearing the wrong thing today? Are you fearing disease? Are you fearing your family's plight? Are you fearing the divorce that's on the horizon? Are you fearing your marriage partner? Are you fearing your children? Are you fearing the loss of your job? Are you fearing the fact that the economy is unstable and you may not have retirement or social security or whatever they call it in Canada? Are you fearing the fact that you may not be able to see your grandchildren or your grandfather or mother? What are you fearing? Let me tell you something. You may want to make sure you fear the wrong person, or excuse me, the right person. Don't make the mistake of the people of Isaiah's day. When we have that in perspective, then we begin to understand what really is happening around us. I think I should stop there. I could go on, but you would get tired. Mark would send me a nasty letter, and then that would be it. So,
yeah, that's true.
I was kidding, of course.